Good morning, noon, evening or night, depending when you're watching this video. My name is Alegende and welcome back to World of Tanks and the greatest of games, where we take a look at some notable games and specifically some of the more unique gameplay features which you might not have considered, have heard of, and might actually learn something from. And as always these days we have 3 different replays, all with a general theme, and the theme of this video it will be unusual actions at the front line. And in this first replay we can already see why this would be an unusual action at the front line, because we are watching Cifra GM playing in his Guerrilla 15, a tank that you definitely would not expect being at the front line. But that's not the only unusual thing about this game, because the replay is a little bit bugged, so you can see his gun turning the same direction all the time. Just ignore that for a bit, especially later on, because it's, well, the aiming reticle where his gun is actually aiming. So Cifra starts off this game actually being in the, well, typical tank destroyer position, getting even a kill because, well, it's just a good position. But after a while he is going towards the front in order to progress the battle, because in his camping position nothing will actually happen there, and the amount of enemies left on this flank is too little to encourage them to push. So instead of that, he pushes with some results. So using this frontal position with a bit of cover, limited a bit, but at least still a bit of cover from the enemy TD position, and he is able to get a flanking shot at the VK. He's making sure that he stays in the location where he has the cover. Even though the Grill is a pretty tall tank, he is still managing to keep himself completely in cover. But eventually, being a low armored tank destroyer is bound to gather some attention, and the enemy EBR is more happily to oblige spamming HE into his tank. So you might think this is over right now, however Jamesy gets an insanely great jump on the EBR, turning his hull and turret and switching direction at the perfect timing when the EBR was closely skipping by, which is actually a bit of a mistake of the EBR. You always want to have a nice circle if you are circle strafing an enemy tank. Right after he sees the Waffentragen, instantly switches to HE, which is a great choice. Although it doesn't pan, he does know when to fire a specific shell type. And now he's utilizing more of this limited cover against the VK. And, well, you might not have a lot of armor to be at the front line, but at least you have mobility. And like that he outplays the VK. Now this is the moment that he actually overextends. He gets another flanking shot off, but by doing that he gets shot by the Death Star, and this could have been a killing shot for him. So the reason I think he did that is mainly because of overestimation and lack of knowledge about the new position of the enemies, or not knowing the position of the enemies prior to this moment, because the Death Star and the Judas weren't spotted before. But he gets some revenge, eventually kills the SD2, but gets unfortunately outplayed by RNG. It's just bound to happen that from this occasion, but his team is still able to pick off the Batchet and win the game. So an unusual tank to see at the front line, but this has been a very effective game for Cifra. So the thing that he did absolutely amazing is always using cover. Although not enough to hide for artillery. Luckily the artillery wasn't focusing him, but mainly against that typical tank destroyer spot of the enemy team, that little hill was enough to keep him fully in cover. Also, a very good thing to see is that Sifra was engaging enemies one by one, not really overextending too much until later on, but trying to focus down the most isolated targets, switching to the Type 61 because he had a better firing angle, being more in cover for the rest of the enemy team. Also a great jump on the EBR and also made his demise a reality. And lastly, a bit of a mistake at the end, overextending to the SDI could have meant that he was already done with this game. So this shows that the best way to go forwards or time your engagement right is by knowing the locations of the enemies and the amount of enemies. We saw also that in the beginning, the whole reason why he did go forward in the first place was because he knew that there were very little amount of enemies at this flank, easy to pick off. So on to the second battle, and it's me playing in my AMX M4 MLE 51 in Secret Line. But well, this isn't really that unusual, and heavy tank at the front line is pretty usual actually, so why is this included in this video? Well, I'm going to do some strategies that normally I'm not really able to execute because of, well, mainly the map. This map, Secret Line, allows you to do some, well, interesting stuff, and I really like this tactic and I really like to show it to you. So I'm starting off with a typical central road, trying to wait if enemies are going here, nothing really special, but after a while I'm going to reposition from my starting position towards another point at the front, which has more enemy pressure, mainly by that Leopard. So from this position I get a couple shots of the Commons, for some reason trying to, well, switch flanks by driving in front of multiple enemy tanks. Weird, but by doing that he has left his Leopard alone, and this allows me to hunt down the Leopard as an isolated target, as far as I know, because the leftover tanks that haven't been spotted yet are the EBR, T-28 concept and the Charioteer, and the Charioteer already has a kill, the Su-152, who was in the middle, so I'm not really worried about him being there, and I have armor. I mean, this is the tier 9 French heavy, non-auto-loading heavy. This thing actually has some armor. However, the Leopard plays it carefully by keeping himself hidden and waiting for the opportunity when I'm slightly showing my weak spot. So now you see me switching from the left to the right. So knowing that only the Leopard and T-28 are there, I'm not going to try to fully engage them, also with some more enemies in the middle. Instead, I'm not going into a tunnel vision and I'm keeping attention to the other flanks where I also have a shot on. But now on that flank nobody is showing himself, so I'm trying to engage the Leopard again. When I see him I take a bit of a risk, but I know I don't have to worry about one other tier 7 tank destroyer. But I still don't want to expose myself for too long, because you saw I also can get shot at from the middle. Then I notice that the T-28 concept is driving away, so I'm acting like I'm staying here behind this city block, but I'm only acting that way so I can get the surprise on the Leopard, which I know is now fully isolated, or only has support from one direction, and it's the same direction he is in, so I can turn my frontal armor fully towards all of the enemies now, without being worried getting a flanking shot of the T-28 HTC. So in this engagement against the Leopard, I actually am very happy that I'm still playing the low caliber gun, because it gives me a quicker reload than the Leopard, which makes this engagement a whole lot easier. So after dealing with that Leopard, I'm trying to keep an eye on all directions where the enemies are in, but mainly it is still in the village. But then I noticed that the enemy tanks are relocating and might be flanking me. And we are behind on hit points, so I'm retreating to a more defensive position, also in order to support my team. So some great teamwork here with Waffle 9000 in his type for heavy engaging, both engaging the E75 at the same time. Although he is taking some shots from the other flanks, he is able to distract the E75 long enough so that I kill him. Although it is still quite a close game, I'm trying to play carefully, still trying to focus on multiple flanks there where the enemies are most likely to appear or reappear, and knowing when I can move forwards to once again pick off the most isolated target. And like that we are turning the advantage around, and eventually we are able to destroy all of the tanks with me, killing the RT with an HE shell. So what made this an unusual game on the front line? Well, most of the times playing heavy tanks in the front line is that you are bound to be committed to one specific flank. However, the one specific flank for heavies here is half of the front line, which has all of these smaller, well, pass-throughs you can engage enemies at. This allows for the strategy to keep all possible or multiple possible flanks in sight and focus only the ones that are most likely to have enemy tanks. Because if you engage those flanks, you are dealing more damage, you're lowering the enemy team's HP pool, and you're just more likely to win that way. I was isolated myself on the whole right flank. I didn't actually have support from the back from any TDs, but this location was highly defensive and I was always able to, well, at least live for a long time, even if I got rushed. And from those locations it was quite easy to pinpoint some isolated targets. The Leopard, well, before I killed the T28 HTC, which was a nice bonus, I engaged the Leopard, and afterwards I slowly made my way through the city, trying to engage enemies from multiple directions once again. However, at some point I am on the defense, retreating to a more supportive position and don't engage alone anymore. I was considered for a bit, but eventually, especially if you are in a platoon, it's far better to engage the enemies together, especially in scenarios like these where the game is pretty close. But all the way through the end you see me utilizing this great tactic, always trying to focus on multiple directions if the battle dictates so, and rush in to focus down the most isolated targets. And then it's time for the last battle of today, featuring Marshok in his CS44. Quite an unusual tank itself to see featuring in a battle, because it's not that remarkable of a medium. But Marshok will prove you otherwise in this game by, well, being quite unusual at the front line, but because we don't really see this type of engagement from medium tanks, especially not this one. Like all the other battles, Marshok is also starting off on a very typical starting position in order to get some early shots off. But after a couple minutes he is making his way towards the village, all the way up to the front, and takes on the role as the supportive medium in the front. And this game is all about knowing when to engage the enemy tank, when they are distracted. You do want to fire at the enemies, but you aren't a heavy tank, you don't have armor, so if they fire back, they most likely are going to hit and pen you. Because of that, you have to play a lot smarter, knowing when to engage an enemy tank. Most of the time it is right after they have fired, and Marshall is showing some great examples here, so also to lay a little ambush right before a tank is fully traversed next to some cover. Even though he is doing a great job in the city, eventually his teammates are perishing around him, now leaving him and only the Tiger P left in the city. And he is going to show some great teamwork with this Tiger P. So also shout out to Gremlin Doberman in his Tiger P, showing exactly how you should play heavy tanks. And you see Marshok once again engaging an enemy who is distracted. So right back in the supporting role when the Tiger P is engaging the enemies and claiming most of the attention from the enemies instead of Marshok. So a great engagement here in the city, but of course artillery does ruin a bit of Marshok's progression as he's moving further with the Tiger P. And this is the unusual part, because most of the time using mediums, or you are going to go further forwards in your medium, trying to firstly spot the enemy tanks with your mobility, being there first, getting a first shot off. But Marshok very greatly decides to stick with his Tiger P, using him a bit as a meat shield, but that's exactly where heavy tanks are made for. So it is an excellent decision of Marshok to, instead of going further alone, trying to do it by yourself, which, well, is also a thing that I am sometimes guilty of doing, because I think from, well, my crew is good enough and everything is going well enough, I can take this alone. But most of the times you are just so much better off with teammates. The whole mentality of, oh well, then they are going to steal more damage and experience from me, is something that is a mentality that you definitely don't want to have if you want to survive longer or win the entire battle. So now Marshok is going forwards. Now the Tiger P is once again at the front position, and just look at the tunnel vision of the enemies. The enemies are far more likely to pen Marshok right here from the side, but again the Tiger P is still claiming all of the attention of the enemy team. This allows Marco, even though he was fired at by the arty, to have a, well, decent amount of HP left. So after destroying the arty, the enemies are trying to cap the base. So Marshok, with his central position, rushes back in order to at least spot the enemies, even get a shot off, and by doing that he fully resets the base. Now he can go further up to the valley flank and flank the remaining enemy tanks, but once again, after destroying the cappers, he waits for a teammate once again to move along with further up to the flank. And this is a very good decision, because if you look at the bottom left, Marshok is a full one-shot. Alongside with the Achilles, he slowly but surely moves up further up the valley, knowing that he has some support. But the Achilles eventually kills the SU, and together they are engaging the last enemy tank, which is killed with 69 damage. Nice. So in this battle, Marshok well demonstrating how important it is on always going with allied vehicles up the flanks. Even though those allied vehicles do need to have some bit of general skill and knowledge, which you sometimes miss in random teams, but when they actually do, you can get some great team plays off, especially as the supportive medium alongside with the heavy tank, which is getting most of the attention. The support medium can quickly fire a pot shot off every time that the enemy has fired his shot, or if the enemy is directing his attention towards another side, towards that heavy tank, and you can get a flanking shot off. And finally, at the end, after killing the cappers, Marco displayed a great amount of patience, waiting for the Achilles to catch up and go together with him towards the other flank. And even though he didn't really need him in the end as an extra support on the flank, it is definitely the best choice to do, just to be sure, because if you are getting caught out, you at least have some support. You might, worst case, even get destroyed when the enemy is pushing the flank, but at least the enemy is also most likely going to be destroyed because of that extra tank on your flank. And with that, that's the end of this video. We saw several unusual plays at the front line. Hope you learned something from these strategies. And as always, I will see you next time. Laters!